It's time for me to move away from the game of basketball.
Westbrook stops at the 1 and goes down to a knee.
Bitter labor dispute caused the cancellation of the playoffs.
You don't know when he's going to be back. Two really serious concussions.
Hello, welcome back to How To Fantasy Sports. In today's video, what we're going to do is continue our look at the 2012 fantasy football season, specifically our rankings of the wide receivers. Now, as always, these videos or these rankings are a combination of our other videos, the ones on draft strategy and draft guidelines that we have. So if you need a little more explanation or an understanding of maybe why we rank players where they do, check out those videos and maybe they'll provide the information for you. As always, these rankings aren't so much what we think which players will end up where at the end of the season. We think that's just really too difficult to forecast, especially with all the injuries that happen. And really, it doesn't really help us in the game. What we're doing with these rankings are ranking who we think are in the best position to help our team and carry them to a fantasy football title. So in our number one spot, no real surprise here, we've got Megatron, Calvin Johnson from the Detroit Lions. We think he's set up again for another really big year. Detroit is still a pass-friendly offense, and Megatron's Megatron. He is an absolute beast on the field. He's a danger to score at any time, and sometimes he looks like he can just score at will. So really, it's an easy choice to have him number one. We think he'll regress a little bit off his numbers from last year, simply because his numbers last year were just so fantastic. But he's still clearly the number one and best receiving option in fantasy. Now, because we also think he will regress a little bit, we don't think he's worthy of a round one selection. So don't go reaching for him in the first round. If you can get him, pick him up in the second round. And now after that, the wide receiver category gets a little bit muddled, you know. There's a lot of wide receivers out there that are probably going to score quite high over the course of the season. But from game to game, they're going to lack a lot of consistency. Players like, say, Jordy Nelson and Vincent Jackson from last year, they scored a lot of points by the end of the season, but they did it by popping big numbers one week and then going a couple of weeks with some bad totals. And really, these aren't wide receivers that you can rely on, especially ones that you're taking as the first wide receiver on your team. You need a lot more consistency from them. And so we recommend that the players that we have ranked next are ones that are getting a lot of high targets on their teams. They're a focal point in their team's offenses. And we think because of that, they're better positioned to carry your team. And so specifically at number 2, Andre Johnson, number 3, Greg Jennings, and number 4, Larry Fitzgerald. We recognize the injury concerns with Andre Johnson, but really, when he's on the field, he is an absolute beast and really commands a lot of targets in that Houston offense. Greg Jennings probably doesn't command as many targets as Andre Johnson, but he's utilized in a lot of offensive plays for Green Bay. And really, when you're talking about Green Bay, such a high-scoring offense, you know that Greg Jennings is going to come away with a lot of points in the course of the season. And Larry Fitzgerald, he's dealing with a quarterback issue again, and so that obviously limits his upside, but really that guy gets force-fed targets on a game-to-game-to-game basis. He gets his targets, and he gets his chances to make plays and help score you points for your fantasy team. After that, number 5, we've got Roddy White, number 6, Wes Welker, and number 7, Hakeem Nicks. Again, these guys are going to get a lot of targets over the course of the season, but because maybe on their teams they've got another wide receiving threat, they're probably not in the position to command as many targets as our 2 through 4 picks, or even be as much of a focal point in the red zone, getting the opportunity to get UTDs either. So still high ranked, still worthy of being number 1 receiver on your team, but probably not going to take that leap into the top 5 this year simply because of all the receiving options on their team. So next up at number 8, Brandon Marshall. Number 9, Brandon Lloyd. We like these guys. We think they're well situated in their offenses, and really when you start looking at the wide receiver rankings and you see the potential of Wes Welker and Brandon Lloyd, both ending up in the top 10 of wide receivers, you really start to appreciate just the potential season that Tom Brady has, even before you start to consider the options that he has at tight end. So next up are three guys who we really think are well positioned to score a lot of points in fantasy this year, and oddly enough are really still quite low ranked in a lot of other wide receiver rankings that we've seen out there. But we think are positioned to have an excellent season. Specifically, number 10, Eric Decker, number 11, Steve Johnson, number 12, Percy Harvin. Eric Decker, he was the go-to guy when Kyle Orton was the quarterback, and Kyle Orton is much more the quarterback in the mold of Peyton Manning than Tim Tebow was. So we think Eric Decker becomes the guy there, not Demaryius Thomas. And really, if you're a guy who's getting throws from Peyton Manning, what more could you want out of your fantasy receiver? We think he's well worth the risk over there. Steve Johnson, again, he's the number one receiver clearly in Buffalo, and we think Buffalo's offense is sneaky better than you probably think it is. And even over his first two seasons, he's gotten over 1,000 yards each year, between 7 and 10 TDs. We think in the third year, which is usually the year that wide receivers take that next leap, Steve Johnson's poised for a great season. I don't understand why he's so low ranked in a lot of rankings. And number 12, Percy Harvin, again, main receiving option out of Minnesota. He actually finished top 10 last year, so why is he being ranked so low this year? We don't really appreciate that. We understand some of the injury concerns, but I think he's only missed, 3 games all of the last 3 seasons? Something like that. Anyway, he actually doesn't miss a lot of games. Anyway, he's 12 on our listing. And so after those top 3, we actually still have a lot of great receiving options for us. A lot of guys that are going to get a lot of targets and contribute quite well in fantasy circles. Specifically, number 13, Julio Jones. Number 14, Victor Cruz. Number 15, A.J. Green. We do like A.J. Green. We think he's a great receiving talent. He's obviously the number one option in Cincinnati. But really, when you're in Cincinnati and your quarterback's Andy Dalton, that limits your upside, unfortunately. Number 16, Dwayne Bowe. Number 17, Antonio Brown. We like Mike Wallace, but we think Antonio Brown demonstrated last year that he's the possession receiver. He's the go-to guy on third down. He's the one who's going to lead that team in targets this year, and that's the guy from Pittsburgh that you want to target this year, not Mike Wallace. And so now, after those top 17, we really hope that when you're drafting, you draft all your starting wide receivers from those top 17. Obviously, this will be difficult depending on the number of wide receivers that your league drafts, but all your starting positions specifically hopefully will be filled with a wide receiver from those categories, because from a game-to-game basis, you'll be able to rely on those people. The people that we have ranked after this probably will get a high point total by the end of the season, but they're going to do it by popping big games and then giving you a couple of garbage games. And you just can't rely on that from a fantasy perspective. It's just not going to help you in the long run to build consistency, to be able to compete from week to week to week. Sure, you might be able to win that week when they pop a big total, but those couple of weeks after where they're just maddeningly coming away with 2 catches for 23 yards isn't going to help your team at all. And so at number 18, we've got Mike Wallace. At number 19, we've got Marquise Colston. Number 20, we have Steve Smith. Again, we think Cam Newton regresses a bit this season. We think the second half of Steve Smith's season from last year is more of an indication of what he'll produce this year than the first half. Because of that, don't overpay by taking him any earlier in your drafts. Where are we at? 21. At 21, Pierre Carcon. At number 22, Jeremy Maclin. Number 23, Miles Austin. We like Miles Austin. We think he's a great producer when he's in the lineup, but this guy's looking like his hamstrings are never going to make it through a season ever again, and that's just too much risk to really take on. So keep dropping him in your rankings and feel free to maybe avoid him at all costs. And so after those guys, we've got a bunch of players that really rely on the big play, the long bomb TD touchdown, to really pop great fantasy points during the season for you. Again, they'll probably end up the season with a lot of points, but they're going to do it so inconsistently that you're going to have a lot of frustrating weeks with some pretty low scores in your lineup from them. So it's best to avoid them if you can. If you're in a deeper league that drafts a lot of wide receivers, obviously you'll have to get into these guys, but make sure they're low options. Your third wide receiver, maybe even your fourth wide receiver, because of that. Specifically, we're talking about number 24, Vincent Jackson, number 25, Jordy Nelson. Again, don't chase his high TD total. Very unrepeatable. Number 26, Des Bryant. Number 27, Kenny Britt. Again, we actually like Kenny Britt. We think he's a great talent, but that guy just can't stay on the field, whether it's injuries or legal problems. Don't take the risk there. Number 28, Demaryius Thomas, and number 29, the king of all big plays, Deshaun Jackson. And so now after them, we still have 5 wide receivers that you probably would consider the number 1 receiving option on their team, but because of either the options on their team or that maybe the offensive plays aren't necessarily going through them on a more consistent basis, they're not really that worthwhile drafting on your team unless it's for a bench spot. So specifically, we're talking about number 30, Malcolm Floyd, number 31, Reggie Wayne, number 32, Darius Hayward-Bay, number 33, Anquan Bolden, and number 34, Santonio Holmes. And so then bringing up the back end of our rankings, at number 35, Mike Williams, number 36, Robert Meacham, number 37, Lance Moore, number 38, Michael Crabtree, number 39, Greg Little, and at number 40, not Torrey Smith. Again, we don't really understand this love that people are giving Torrey Smith. We think he is a poor man's Deshaun Jackson. He relies on the big play, the long TD bomb to get all his points, and really in that Baltimore offense, which doesn't really produce a lot of big plays, at least not in the aerial game. That's a risk to be taking him on anywhere in your draft. He's more likely to put up big goose eggs in your lineup than he is big plays. So try to avoid Torrey Smith at all costs. And so that brings us to the end of our rankings of the wide receiver position for the 2012 fantasy football season. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, send us an email at question@howtofantasysports.com. Otherwise, if you want to subscribe to this YouTube channel to stay informed on when our next videos are up, click on the button above. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon.